All right, welcome everybody. It's Megan, the VoIP brand manager here, and on the line with me is Matt Carey, our senior engineer.
Hello.
So the purpose of today's webinar is to follow on from a webinar that we actually ran at the end of September, and just look a little bit more into the scoping and planning and how that planning should look when you are looking at a new 3CX site, roughly some timeframes of what you should be working to and all the best practice. So Matt's gonna walk us through that. And if you have any questions, pop them in the chat. We will have a Q&A at the end of the webinar. So feel free to pop them in the chat window as we go along, but we will only look at them as we get to the end of the webinar. So I'll hand over to Matt and talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. So, as Megan noted, we ran a webinar before, which was sort of a generalized VoIP deployment overview. And there's a lot of common questions out there, especially from newer partners. So we thought we'd put together today a bit of a webinar specifically catered towards 3CX, just to have a look at a few key points. So let's begin. And apologies if we do maybe go slightly over our time window. Initially, I planned for this to be between 15 to 30 minutes. I made a mistake for the webinar saying it'd be an hour and a half, so I imagine you guys have already got that time down. But anyway, what makes for a successful deployment with 3CX? A big key thing is 75% of it is planning it correctly, making sure we're all ready for deployment day ahead of time. We've got everything scoped out, we've got everything written down. We need to make sure that we've got our port forwards in place and ALGs turned off, which we'll look at. We need to make sure we have an understanding of the call flow. A lot of customers on legacy PBX systems have a existing call flow in place, and it can vary in scale and difficulty. And a lot of end users typically want to have the same call flow, which is sometimes doable, sometimes it's not. It depends on the system. We need to know whether they're looking at physical phones on desks, and if that's the case, we need to think about some smart things about how we're going to deploy them, especially whether 3CX is in cloud or on-prem. We need to make sure we're doing backups. End user training, of course, critical because we want to know that these people know how to drive the system that they've just paid for, and the importance of scheduling a follow-up after install as well. So let's have a look at planning again. 75% is making sure it's all correct ahead of the day. We don't want complications on the day that we have to cater for because it's more time for us, which I guess could potentially be nice for billable hours, but still. And it's setting that expectation with the end user, giving them that comfort that when you finally do cut across, that you've got everything planned ahead of time. A big aspect beyond the planning is making sure that the firewall is all set to go and actually can support VoIP. If they're using an entry-level Spark router, for instance, then you're probably going to have a bad time. So making sure that we're catering to that as well before deployment day, and probably making sure that we've actually got that firewall pinhole in place ahead of time. We don't want to be having to run the firewall checker over and over and over on the day. Planning out DNS as well is really important. The recommended way of deploying 3CX is to have split DNS, and that's basically having our external DNS pointing to the external static IP. Static IPs are important, and making sure that our internal DNS is pointing to the correct location as well. You can deploy 3CX purely on IP. If someone doesn't have a DNS server or something like that on site, it's doable. But this restricts the ability to have remote extensions, because if you have something that's talking to a local IP at a different site and network, it's not going to resolve correctly. We need to plan ahead around SSL as well. So we had 3CX training in-house, which was a great success yesterday. So you need a third-party SSL. Self-signed doesn't work. There are two ways of doing SSLs with 3CX. You can have the 3CX generated one, provided that you've got active maintenance or a current subscription. Or my preferred method is to have your own SSL. The end user organization may even have a wildcard or something in place already. Good place to go if you need one and they're price sensitive is ssls.com. They have a special on at the moment. I think it's like $3 for an SSL. And also Soft Solutions, we do procurement services here as well. We have the ability to provide SSLs for purchase, and our admin team here are skilled in assisting with generation of things like CSR and that sort of good stuff. Physical phone wise, things to consider, especially looking at their existing systems. How many BLF buttons do they need? Are they going to be using PoE? And if they're using PoE, are they going to be doing VLANs? Do they need sidecars for receptionists, so they've got physical buttons, or are they just going to be using expanded presence view on the soft phone? Do we need something like a Bluetooth phone? And I'll just plug the GXP 2135 here. Great phone, probably our most popular one, and it has Bluetooth as well. Do we need portables, DECT for example, or the new Wi-Fi phones that we have available from Grandstream? Ahead of time, we need to know what existing extensions are there, what are their DDIs, what are their mobile numbers, what are their email addresses, do they require CRM integration, and if so, what database are they currently using, how will that data be pulled in, and do they need TAPI? I released a blog post recently around sizing simultaneous call count, and we've sort of driven it a little bit to death on how that actually works, but basically it's any established call between A to B. So sizing that the first time is important, and depending on the site, if they're a call center, for example, they may have more people on the phone at the same time, so you need to cater for that. Or if it's a small organization, then perhaps not so much, but you can always increase that license, which is great. There's a lot of flexibility and we can assist with that. However, you can't decrease the license. So probably better to cater to a smaller one to start, and then if they're hitting that simultaneous call count, then you can absolutely increase from there. And a lot of people do struggle with this, but I always say, you can look at billing and all that sort of stuff, but it can get a little bit complex. But ideally, you want to do a site walk around ahead of time anyway, for checking for are there ports available for phones, whether they're going to use PoE, etc. And then just keep an eye out for how many people are on the phone, provided it's not something like a lunch break. And you can get a general gist from that as well. Big thing as well, who are their incumbent provider? Are they on analog lines, or are they already with a SIP provider? And if they are with a SIP provider, is it 3CX ready? Have they undergone interop? And also to know in advance, how long will it take to port those numbers across? So typically with a phone number port, you get an AM or a PM, no specific times, which can be frustrating, and it has been known for providers to say they'll port in the AM and they actually do it in the PM. So planning for that cutover ahead of time. And of course, before those numbers port, you want 3CX in place. And set the date. Are we doing it during production hours or outside production hours to prevent any disruption to the office? But the cool thing about 3CX as well is if they do have an analog system and you're planning cutover, you could absolutely put 3CX in ahead of time, have it all set to go, and then it's just a number port. So it can make things really simple, but definitely want to plan. And I've got that little catchphrase at the top. Planning properly prevents problems. It's the 4 Ps. If you have the scope and a plan in place, deployment is rather simple. And my surface is frozen briefly. Give me a moment, guys. Okay, networking requirements. I've put 3CX's skeleton in here because it is basically you need your networking working correctly. If you get the network set up correct the first time, and of course there's lots of documentation on our SoftSol blog, there's lots of details on the 3CX website, and there's a 3CX Academy that lists in there, the likes of port 5060, 5090, and your RTP ports. If you get that right first time, audio is going to work well. And that's really important because moving to VoIP can be a little bit scary, especially for end users who are used to traditional phone systems. 3CX has a firewall tester in there. Strongly recommend running it after you forwarded those ports. Make sure they're working. 3CX requires full cone NAT as well. Now, some routers struggle with this. A lot of them don't. But basically what full cone NAT is basically allowing incoming traffic to translate to the correct IP address so you get correct audio. SIP ALG is nightmare fuel, so make sure it's turned off. This can be difficult on some firewalls. The FortiGates, for example, back in the day were a little tricky, and SIP ALG can cause complications around one-way audio, because basically what it does is it sees the SIP traffic coming in, and it says, oh, I know what to do with that. So something that may be inbound on port 9255 for RTP, it may say, hey, I'm going to stick that into port 18,000 because I'm controlling it. And of course, 3CX isn't expecting it on that port, so you'll get one-way audio. A good way to test for ALG to make sure it is turned off is when you deploy a system, make a phone call inbound and outbound, and make sure it stays up for more than 32 seconds. Typically with ALG, if it doesn't stand for more than 32, then you're getting no ACK in your SIP signaling and you've got some problems there, so make sure that's turned off. Touched on split DNS, but it's really important, as you can see there, basically making sure the internal is going to the internal static IP and the same for the external. Planning ahead of time, are they using VLAN tagging? And that's something to bear in mind for when you're provisioning phones as well, or is it just a simple network? Multicast as well, something to plan for ahead of time. If you've got a cloud 3CX and you plug a phone in locally, multicast only goes to the edge of the network, so you'll need something like a VPN or a session border controller in there as well. So call flow, really important. As I touched on before, a lot of people want to match it as much as possible, but we need to work out what is the existing call flow. Is it something like a simple direct dial number that goes to maybe a digital receptionist, like an IVR saying, press 1 for this, press 2 for that? Is it going to a collection of extensions? And if so, is it a ring group where you want them to ring in order or all at the same time? Or is there a requirement to have a call queue for people to actually wait in line for a call to be answered, something like a call center, or not wanting to lose a call? And the best way I found to do this is to have something like a Visio diagram, map it out, show the call coming in and the options. It's easier to visualize for the end user and it's easier to sign off on. And that's the real important thing here, is get them to sign off on it, because when you get on site, you don't want them to say, oh, actually, I would like the call to flow in a slightly different way. It's better if everyone's on the same page. It makes deployment a lot easier. So a key component of this is have a chat to the receptionist. They're taking the brunt of most incoming calls and passing them around. And the cool thing about 3CX is you can say to them, if the receptionist has a high workload, maybe something like an IVR would be a good option. Press 1 for sales, 2 for tech, or if you'd like to speak to a real person, please press 0. So then it gives the incoming caller an option so they can go to the right place, and it can lessen the workload for a receptionist. We've seen that occur quite a lot, and people seem to love the feature. And of course, yes, sign it off. It makes things a lot simpler on the day. So, very common question I get asked, whether it's when we're doing updates, trainings, emails, is what do we see as a distributor when it comes to physical phones or soft phones? And it is completely up to the end user. It's a mix. I'd say it's 50-50 depending on the organization. Megan has a fantastic anecdote which is saying, with kids, they still mimic picking up a physical handset. It's well driven into our culture to answer a phone by lifting a physical handset, so it can be jarring moving into a headset. And a lot of that is around that fear of change. It's not knowing how to operate a headset properly, so that's where end user training is really important as well. So,
Just jumping in there, Matt, one of the
sure.
key things around physical versus soft phone that we see, and when we're talking with partners, is often you'll find people that are in that kind of call center environment, dealing with a lot of calls. They're used to wearing a headset, so soft phone or web client is perfect for them because they're used to that scenario. But a lot of staff that are in, I guess, admin roles and that type of thing still like that physical hardware on their desks. So you do see sort of across organisations that there is a real mixture, and that's not a bad thing. So just be prepared for, it'll be a preference thing more than anything.
Absolutely, 100%. And bearing in mind as well, with physical phones and 3CX, you can drive the phone with the soft phone or the web client as well, so that can potentially make things a little bit easier, having to dial less physical numbers. And that's cool as well when you start integrating with the likes of CRM and things like that, so you can just click a link, that's a number, and have it automatically dial on a phone. So real nice quality of life things there. So there are two ways to drive a physical phone with a soft phone or the web client. So the older way was called CTI, and I was very familiar, well, am very familiar with it, I should say, because I had to write some templates to get specific phones to work with it back in the day. So that was the old way of driving phones. There's this new buzzword, which is UACSTA, so that's based on a user agent that allows for a supported phone to work with the new web client, and we're seeing a lot of 3CX customers moving towards the web client now because it does a few things. One, it's a lot prettier. It's easier on the eyes than the soft phone client. It means no .NET installation on the local machine as well, and you can just have it opening as a tab when the end user opens their browser, which is really cool. Some general advice around DEC portables as well. So the big thing with DEC, it's limited to 11 channels, but it's still very popular. We've had a new set come out for, well, I guess not so new now, but we have a very decent set from Grandstream. So we've got the DP series with the Year links as well. They have some DEC portables in there too. But general thing with DECT is signal quality. Attenuation increases the further you get from a base. That just makes sense. So line of sight is always going to operate better. If you have something like a warehousing scenario or a mechanic with metal racks and things like that, that's going to bounce that signal and increase the attenuation. So generally what I say is as high as you can get the base station itself is more easier to have a line of sight through air than it is through a wall or metal. So that's something to bear in mind too. Of course, you can get repeaters as well. And around headsets,
Can
there
I
are a
just
lot of,
jump in there
yeah,
before you go to headsets, Matt? Just with
yep.
the DECT, the new base station that Grandstream released towards the end of last year, that is ceiling mountable as well. So it is actually very flexible for where you put that base station for your DECT portables. So that's just something to consider.
Absolutely, and that was actually a really nice feature as well. When I was writing a blog about it, Megan sent me an email shortly after saying, "Don't forget, you can ceiling mountable." And it's like, oh yes, that is actually fantastic. Makes it a lot easier. So soft phone headsets, we get a lot of recommendations. There are some guideline documentations for integrating with phones and things like that on the vendor websites. Grandstream have them, Yearlink have them. So when it comes to 3CX specifically, Sennheiser are the only headset currently that have actually gone through interop. If you ever deal with 3CX support, they always recommend using a Sennheiser because it does just work, which is really nice. If you don't have a Sennheiser headset or don't want to invest in one and you're looking at something along the lines of a Plantronics or a Jabra, there's a couple of things to consider. You need to make sure you have the correct cables, especially if you're connecting them to phone. There's no unified standard of where the positive, negative, and ground wires are. So basically what these cables do is they just make sure all the voltage is correct and that everything's talking to the correct place. So that's something important. If you are testing, say, a Bluetooth headset with a Bluetooth phone, a key thing to keep in mind is give it a test, see if the call pickup button works. A lot of headsets have an answering button on the side. Some work, some don't, so definitely test that. Another thing to test as well, if it's not a Sennheiser, is does it stay paired with the machine or the phone throughout the day? Just do a little bit of testing as well, because there's nothing worse than having to reset a headset randomly to get it back working, and that can be a frustrating pain point for end users. And again, that key consideration, are you connecting the headset to the phone, so you need the cable, or are you connecting it straight to the PC? Are you using the web client or the soft phone? So fun tip, so physical phone, so again, it's driven by a CTI, which is the older standard, or CSTA, provided that it's supported on a phone. It is a firmware thing, and of course with 3CX, we always recommend upgrading to the latest firmware. Do recommend trying out the web client. It's very cool. It works with Grandstream, Yearlink, Fanville, HTech, and Snom. And something important to keep in mind with DECT phones is pretty much all DECT phones only support the older CTI technology. The older CTI stuff is via make call. So if you do have an end user organization that is looking at deploying DECT, they will be limited to the Windows soft phone rather than the web client. So it is still doable that you can still have presence. You can have them picking up calls from the soft phone client itself with the DECT units, but that is something important to keep in mind. Backups, just turn them on because it's very simple. At install time, as we'll see in the slide shortly, just turn it on, do a backup. You've invested half an hour or an hour installing a system. Taking a quick backup will take 2 minutes. It's built in, it's from the management console. It's very simple to do. It can be scheduled, which I recommend as well. You can do it daily or weekly. No reason, I guess, not to do it daily because it is very quick. It's not resource intensive or anything like that. And the admin email of the system will always get a notification of whether it's passed or failed, so you can monitor it that way. You have the ability, so you always have system configuration in there, like extensions and inbound rules, outbound rules, and that sort of stuff, but you do have the ability to exclude FQDN or a license key call recordings, and this is mainly around the more data that is in the backup, the larger it's going to be, and it's going to take slightly longer. And the key consideration to take into account there is if a customer system went down, what is it that they need to actually be able to restore? Do they care about call recordings or voicemails? Do we need to be backing these things up in the first place? Big thing with 3CX as well, and best practice is, especially with the Windows edition, 3CX when you install on Windows, and we are seeing a lot of Debian out there as well. When you give the installer admin privileges to install, it only gets permission to its own directory, so that's where the backups are going to live. So the second you take a backup, if you do need it on the local device, change the directory. And the reason for this, well, there's a couple of reasons. One, if you were to move between major editions of 3CX, it needs a backup and restore if you're on the Windows edition. And to do that, you have to do an uninstall. And if you've got your backup file sitting in your main directory, you've just uninstalled your backup. So definitely put it somewhere else. And so my general recommendation is there's the ability to take it offsite via FTP, so you could have a FileZilla server sitting somewhere. Of course, you've got to forward port 21 at the remote site for that. But you can also go to Google Drive, and that's free. And basically, a 3CX backup, especially if you're not including call recordings, isn't that large. And it's just a couple of clicks. Basically, you say, go to Google Drive for my backup. It'll pop up a screen, and if you're already signed in, then it will ask you to authorize. If not, then sign yourself in. It gives you a key which you copy and paste into 3CX. You tell it what directory in the Google Drive to take the backup to, and that's it. Schedule it, it'll automatically be going offsite. It's not costing you any money, and you have that peace of mind. You're not going to get that phone call from the end user saying, oh, the system's dead, and then you have to rebuild the whole thing from scratch. For restores as well, so of course with the Enterprise Edition, you do have that ability to have an active and passive system which utilizes that backup file, sends it over to the remote server. The remote server can be set up with a heartbeat, so it can be monitoring whether the SIP server's up, the SIP tunnel is up, or whether the web server is up at the production site, and if it goes down, then it can bring it back up, and there's some DNS scripting that you can do in there as well. So basically, when it comes to restore time, if you weren't using an Enterprise Edition license and you didn't have failover in place, it's as simple as taking that external DNS, because of course, best practice, we've got split DNS, pop it to the new external static IP with a shortened TTL, so it will flick over a little bit quicker. Do the restore, that'll take 10 to 15 minutes, and they're basically up and running again. So it is very, very simple. And as a bit of a paranoid person, I'm sysadmin here at SoftSol. When you do a 3CX install, I typically do a backup as follows. So I'll do it immediately after getting access to the management console because I've just spent 15 to 20 to 30 minutes, depending on machine resource, to do an install. I don't want to have to repeat that. So especially when I've popped in all my FQDN details and license key and all that sort of stuff. So take a quick manual backup at that point in time. Notably as well, when you first install 3CX, it will display a screen basically with your FQDN and your admin login and password and all that sort of stuff. That is only displayed once. There isn't a way to be able to get that to show again. You can reset an admin password from the management console now at the login screen, but I recommend just taking a quick screenshot of that and storing it away somewhere safe. Recommend taking a quick backup after you build out your extension list, especially if it's something like 100 extensions and you've put them in manually, because again, that's time. And then just schedule it afterwards to make sure it's going, probably on a daily basis, preferably to Google Drive, and you have that peace of mind. So when it comes to end user training, there's a common phrase thrown around, which is train the trainer. I like to call it enabling the enablers instead. There is an end user guide and it's quite visual on the 3CX website now, which is a great resource for end users. But what the general recommendation is to find the power users in the organization, the people that show interest in it or think it's kind of cool. And typically I found there are two types of staff. Now, typically this will be the receptionist, because they're the main people that are transferring calls or taking the inbound calls, and maybe more than one receptionist. And when we do end user training for our professional services engagements, we always go to the receptionist as well, because typically people will come to them, and things that receptionists really like is the presence view, because they can see everything going on, and the switchboard as well. Once they understand the difference between blind versus an attended transfer, they feel a lot more comfortable with the system as well. And especially when you show them how easy it is to drag and drop calls and not even really have to touch their phone to transfer calls. Typically see those as the exciting features which engage them quite well. And of course, the sysadmin techie, because they'll probably be more willing to adopt a soft phone and a headset. And things they typically like is, of course, the soft phone's cool. They don't need a physical handset on the phone. They can walk around, they can do things with headsets on. And the cell phone app, which is, of course, really cool. You have a cell phone app so you can run the 3CX soft phone wherever. You could have a headset paired to your cell phone as well, whether it's on Wi-Fi or whether it's on cellular, you have that ability there as well. So once you get those two types of staff members upskilled and engaged, other people that are feeling a little shaky or unconfident within the organization, they can comfortably go to them and get assistance with the system. So generally, you're going to have a mixed bag when it comes to a new system install. You'll have those people that are really pumped because they've had pain points with the old system, and you've gone and say, hey, we can fix everything. And then you get those people that are very reluctant and resistant to change. They've had a physical phone on their desk since the dawn of time, and that's just how they want it. They don't want to deal with the soft phone or headsets or anything like that. Once you've got a power user in place, it can soften the blow with that a little bit. And with those reluctant staff, we found it quite easy to just put that desk phone on the desk. And when they do become familiar with it, slowly introduce all the bells and whistles of 3CX, all the unified communication stuff. We can see if Frank or Bob's on the phone. We can quickly give them a call, slowly get them to adjust to it, and they'll be all the better for it. And post-install follow-ups, these are really important as well, because this is where you demonstrate your value add as a telephony provider. You're not just clipping the ticket on a license sale and taking margin saying, here's your system, run with it. Traditional systems, they're quite restricted. It's a phone that rings, and it's much the same. A common question, I just did a blog post around this, is just saying, oh, you've got all these telcos that are putting out all these cloud PBX systems, you guys must be a little worried about it. But at the end of the day, it's a simple phone that rings. That's all it is. It isn't presence. It isn't web meeting. It isn't click to call and all that really feature-rich stuff that 3CX has. A follow-up, once they've become capable with the system and they're used to making calls, that's when you can show them all that extra functionality, because I'm sure there are a lot of systems out there these days that have been deployed and they're just not using half of the features. And there's a lot of cool stuff in there. We've touched on web meeting and click to call and all that sort of stuff. Maybe it will be the mobile phone client. Maybe we'll be introducing them to custom presence and how to get more out of their forwarding rules as well. It also allows you to follow up and check how they're getting on with the system. Are there any issues that they're facing? For example, are headsets unpairing randomly, or are calls going to weird places? Are there audio issues, which there shouldn't be, because of course we've tested that our firewall config has been done properly. And it can allow you to identify additional requirements as well. So do they need more phones? Are they hitting license cap? Do they need failover and things like that? And the nice thing about touching base is it's that care aspect. You become a trusted person with that organization. That can do a few things. One, you're going to get that renewal business, and if they're comfortable talking to you, and then you can get more things in there as well. It may not be a phone system, it may be a backup solution or something like that. It allows to build trust with the end users. So definitely do a follow-up. I would usually say 2 months after install, check in with them, see how they're going, make sure the staff members are getting on okay with the system. Are they struggling? Do they need help? Do our power users maybe need a little more upskilling and the likes? And as a final note, and for everyone on the webinar, you probably already know this, SoftSol, we have in-house expertise, we have technicians here, and we offer free first level support. We pick up the phone when you call us, and we have a 2-hour SLA with our ticketing system, and that doesn't matter whether you're a platinum, gold, silver partner, you could be an affiliate. You may not have sold 3CX before, but we are here to help. We can assist with scoping, especially if you're new to the game or have a complicated call flow that you'd like some assistance with. We can do end user demos in person and via a webinar as well. We've had a lot of success with that, where we've come into an organization and potential prospects have been brought in, and we just do, say, a half-hour to an hour session, bring in the next prospect, do another hour session, and do that if you guys are getting into VoIP for the first time, or aren't comfortable with presenting it, or want that additional experience to field any queries from the customer. We have professional services as well, so we can come out on site, we can do customized 3CX training, we can do end user training as well, and we can also assist with doing installs, which we're finding is increasing in popularity. Get a techie in with us, we'll help install the system, teach them as we go, and get you guys more familiar. And of course, we keep our channel partners updated. We have a monthly VoIP email that Megan puts together with all the latest and greatest. It could be events coming up, it could be new functionality or critical things coming in future. We have our LinkedIn user group as well, where we post a lot of content, so strongly recommend checking that out as well, or reach out to us if you would like invitation or can't find it. We have a YouTube channel as well, where we regularly update with videos with tips and tricks, and when new kit comes out, I typically do a review and put some thoughts out there. We have our weekly newsletter as well, so definitely recommend reading that. So we always keep our channel up to date and informed. That's who we are with Soft Solutions. We answer the phone, we have the knowledge, and we have the expertise. So thank you for joining. Megan, is there anything you'd like to add?
I was just going to jump in there and just reiterate what Matt started off with. The key to success with every deployment, whether you're new to VoIP or are a veteran of VoIP, is your planning. So planning is just so essential. And generally speaking, Matt, I think you'd say kind of 3 to 4 weeks of planning before
Oh,
implementation, giving
absolutely.
time for porting, all those types of critical things. And the other key is following up with your customer after the install has been live. So a phone call after 1 week, a phone call another 2 weeks later, and an on-site within 2 months. It keeps you in touch with your customer. It makes you aware of any pain points very, very quickly, so that you can jump in and get those resolved, because VoIP is a critical part of any business organization. And if something goes wrong, you don't want that jeopardizing your relationship with your customer, because at the end of the day, that relationship is why your customer works with you. So you want to protect that and be proactive about it. So I think those are probably the real key things to take away from Matt's presentation. So if anybody's got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat window, or if any questions have come in, I'm working remotely today, so I can't get onto the chat window. So Matt will check those. The other thing I was just going to say is we do have another webinar on Tuesday after the long weekend. And that's to cover off study tips, how to pass those academy certifications, what are the tips and tricks that Matt has learnt over the years. So the link for that webinar is in our weekly newsletter that came out yesterday, or if you require it, feel free to reach out to either myself or Matt and we can flick that through for you. We got any
Awesome.
questions there, Matt?
No. No, we're looking all good. So I guess we'll wrap it up. We only went 4 minutes over, so that's great.
Fantastic. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us today. We hope you have a great long weekend. We'll all give you Monday off, and hopefully your clients will give you Monday off as well. And hopefully some of you can join us on Tuesday for our next webinar. As always, if you're ever in doubt, you can email us on voip@softsoul.co.nz and it will get to the right people. And as Matt said, we're always just a phone call away. Thanks, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Have a great long weekend.